This episode's brought to you by Heidi. Imagine kicking back while a HIPAA-compliant AI scribe juggles your notes, ICD-10 codes, letters, billing, and all that jazz for free. Yeah, you heard us right. On the house, it's free. From the genius brain of Dr. Tom, who hated wasting his life writing notes, he started Heidi to change the game. Your Heidi transforms consult babble into crisp, clear soap notes, personalizing itself with every edit you make. It's the next best thing to cloning yourself without the weird science behind it. One day, your Heidi will look through research, take calls, and do anything you don't want to. So what's the catch? There's no catch. If you currently pay for an AI scribe in your practice, you should swap to Heidi. They'll even credit you for anything you've already paid. Heidi will save you an hour or more a day without dipping into your wallet. Dive into the description for the link and make your practice the envy of every stethoscope in town. Sign up, lean back, and watch Heidi work its magic. All for free because you've got better things to do.
We work hard as physicians to take care of the health and well-being of our patients. But when it comes to our money, do we have the same condition of care? Probably not. Let's change that together. Welcome to the Financial Freedom for Physicians podcast, where we'll fight and advocate for your financial literacy. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. Thanks for being here. Let's jump into the show. Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode, and I've got a fantastic guest for you calling all the way from London, Kieron James, and he's an entrepreneur. He talks about technology, and he's got a lot of different interests as well as mindset and lifestyle balance, and we're here to talk about open banking, fintech. He comes from the fintech center, and I'm really excited about this conversation. So Kieron, welcome.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me. Really pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Well, this afternoon, my time. I'm not sure what time it is your time.
Yeah. I love how the internet has just basically, there's open 24/7 and, hopefully the banks can, catch
One
wind.
day.
So yeah, talk about your story. And I know you're interested in open banking and which is really interesting. And there's a lot of great work coming out of London, fintech, blockchain, digital assets. So talk about your background and we'll dive right into it.
Absolutely. Happy to do so. Yeah, I got into the fintech sector in quite a circuitous manner, really. And it might be worth me just winding back a little while and talk you through that journey very quickly. I've been involved in information technology businesses for the best part of 25 years now. It's a very long time. You can probably tell from my grey hairs. Been around the block a little bit. Started life in a trade association in London, working as an economist and statistician, then moved into high school teaching for a while. Then ended up in the Middle East running a training institute in the Sultanate of Oman for a while. And it was at that point, actually, that I started working on my own. So I was asked to put together some marketing material for this training institute. This would have been 1998. And they asked me to put together a PDF. And I thought, well, actually, the internet is starting to emerge. Why don't we think about building a website? So that was my first foray into doing my own thing. So when I finished that job, I, like probably the rest of the world, decided I was going to be a web developer or a web designer. So I got back to the UK, took out a small bank loan, bought myself an Apple Mac computer and set about designing websites. I often comment it was fun in those days because the search engine optimization was a little bit easier than it is nowadays. With fewer web pages and probably far less sophisticated algorithms to work your way around. But yeah, so started off in technology in that space, did a bit of domain name registration. We sold a business to VeriSign back in 2000. Company formations online, so we did that for a while. Most recently, before the payments side, was actually in telephony. So I was in ran a telecoms business aimed at small businesses, providing online telephony services for those.
Yeah.
And the fintech piece came really completely serendipitously. It was an accident. So 2016 was a big year for the family. It was my 25th wedding anniversary. It was my 50th birthday. A couple of kids had significant birthdays, and I thought, what can we do to mark this year? I'll run a marathon for charity. So I decided to do that. And then we decided we'd go a step further and actually build the fundraising platform that processed all of the donations from people supporting my effort. That seemed like a great idea. I had some great engineers in the telecoms business, all super supportive, and said, yeah, we'll give up our coffee breaks and lunch hours and we'll do this thing and give back. So we built it as a proof of concept. Then we got a corporate sponsor involved. But really what caused, and I know it's been a long journey to get to this point, what caused the problem for that was the cost of processing donations. So all of those donations were being processed using credit and debit cards, and that just became really prohibitive for our corporate sponsor. We were being really successful, but essentially every penny we got from the corporate sponsor just went to paying fees. So we had to find a solution to that problem in order to, increase our reach and impact. Otherwise, we were just basically stuck. And open banking is that solution that we found. A couple of years ago, we started with a third-party provider. Then we thought, this is such a great thing. Let's sell the telecoms business, move all the staff to this new payments business, get ourselves authorized, and here we are today.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And we're really talking about, because we're really fighting it here. You and me talked about it a little bit, but we're fighting it here. We kind of got a lot of legacy institutions, and, kind of this 2 to 3% transaction fee doesn't really cut it for, when we can get it for like pennies or fraction of a pennies now. So one thing I have questioned a lot of the audience, I know, Bitcoin comes into the conversation and it's really come into the mainstream as a legitimate asset class. And so how are you doing this? How are you doing it? What platform are you doing it on? Is it on blockchain? Is it on kind of standard, what is it called? The Swift, the Swift network?
Nope.
Go ahead.
So our underlying payment system in the UK is something called Faster Payments, and essentially that's the underlying rails. But what happened in around 2016, 2017 is there was an initiative for the main banks to open up APIs to, fintechs like us. So obviously we need to be authorized, approved, regulated, and all the rest of it. But once we have those authorizations in place, effectively we have access to those payment APIs. We can move money with the consent of a payer to the recipient bank. What happens in that scenario is you're removing, probably a dozen intermediaries from that flow, and it becomes just us between, the payer and the recipient. So by definition, reduces those costs massively because there are far fewer mouths to feed along that journey. And it also massively increases the settlement times. It goes down from, a day or longer if you're using a card to instant. It's literally the moment you consent is pretty much the moment it will hit the merchant's bank account. Importantly as well, as well as removing that cost, it improves the efficiency in terms of it being a really simple process. It removes potential for fraud because there's no data entry. So there are loads and loads of benefits of this approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So, we'll talk about a little bit. One question I have is, for example, like traditional banking system, it's not 24/7, it's like 9 to 5 and very slow. We talked about the speed. And then also it's not easily accessible to a lot of individuals. So if you don't, so talk about accessibility, economic freedom, and how you ensure security and trust, in this open system.
Exactly. It's an odd thing because open banking as a term is kind of a little bit confusing for the consumer, because I guess the last thing you want is for your bank to be open in that sense of security. But that's not where the term comes from. We're talking about the open APIs really that sit behind the technology that sits behind it. But for us, it can be quite a frustrating name because it does put that brand new user of the service to, on the back foot initially. But yes, in terms of accessibility, there's some great things. I mean, smartphone penetration now is pretty high. I think there's still work to be done in that area, but as long as you're using an online bank account, even if you don't want to use a mobile banking app, then you can use an online banking account just to settle that payment. So it would be a case, what happens? Let me just talk you through very quickly the flow. Imagine you're at checkout, you're buying a pair of sneakers on an e-commerce website. you're doing that on let's talk about a cell phone, a smartphone, first of all. You would literally get to check out, and then you say, rather than paying by card and entering my card details, my CVV, my first line of address, zip code, all of those bits and pieces, you would literally just tap to select which bank you used, who you're banking with. That would then automatically, using biometric data, whatever other means of security you use to open your mobile banking app, it would just open that up. And that payment is already there waiting for you just to simply approve. So you're not entering any merchant details. There's no, routing numbers or account numbers, anything like that. Is literally just tap and I'm going to pay this sneaker company $79, whatever it might be. So it's super secure and a lot less friction than entering card details. Because, of course, when you're entering card details, you're trusting the merchant to be using a supplier who is also handling that data securely. And oftentimes, it's probably quite behind the scenes. You're not entirely sure who that card processor, who that network might be. I guess we're all familiar with some of the bigger players now, and there's inherent security there, but it's not always a given. Putting that onto a laptop desktop scenario, then what we try to do is get that user from that laptop screen or desktop screen into their mobile banking app, because that's the quickest way to do it. And typically the way we do that is just present a QR code, and it would do exactly the same thing. Wave your phone at the screen and you're into your mobile banking app and you approve the payment.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so really simple, super secure. And in terms of that accessibility or inclusiveness, I guess, mobile smartphone penetration is pretty high now. I'm sure the situation is very similar in the US, but across the UK and Europe, you've got lots and lots of providers of services. It's not just Apple, or there are fairly reasonably priced smartphones available. But as I say, if you don't want to use a smartphone, you can just log into a mobile banking app. An online banking app.
Yeah, I was doing a lot of thinking the other day, and just kind of like when email came and it made like messaging and communications much faster than USPS, and I see where USPS has become now. And same thing with banks now. With everything moving on to faster, and like especially with blockchain and these digital assets. I'm curious how you see the traditional banking sector in 10 to 15, 20 years. Is just going to be so antiquated, just so slow, and people are going to be on these new rails. I'm just curious your thoughts.
I think it's a really interesting time. In fact, I come to you today. I'm at Rise in Shoreditch, which is a fintech hub, but today is also day one of UK FinTech Week. So I've just been in the Innovate Finance Global Summit all day today and listening to a presentation from the CEO of Monzo Bank, which is one of the big challenger banks in the UK. And I thought it was really interesting listening to his kind of closing remarks, which were about all of those incumbent, the legacy banks, the traditional banks who've got all of the old infrastructure, they've got all the customer base, they've got the trust, they've got all of that, but not necessarily moving at the pace that they need to be moving technology-wise. So in terms of the features that some of the challenger banks are putting in place, they are being left so far behind now. And very, very rapidly, the penetration of some of the challenger banks is incredible. We have one that's focused very much on the UK SME market, and the speed with which it got up to kind of 10% of the total small business market it was mind blowing to see that happen. But they're providing the services that people want to use.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge again, though, is, I guess, getting to that point where you're combining all of the advantages of those traditional banks, all of that recognition and, decades, if not centuries of trust and so on, with the speed and agility of the challengers. And it's going to be, as he's finished, it's going to be a really interesting race over the next 10 years to see whether those traditional banks catch up with the technology and whether the challenger banks catch up with all of that trust and so on that they've managed to gain over so many years.
Yeah. One of the things we're seeing in the United States is a lot of bad faith regulators and, corrupt politicians, Gary Gensler and, Elizabeth Warren and, we had scandals such as FTX. And so how are you seeing on the regulation front? Is London very open to this new technology? Because a lot of the legacy systems here are really anti, because they know it's going to cut into them and cut into their profits, and are we going to have another blockbuster moment? So talk about that.
Without a doubt, this is predicated on progressive regulation. It has to be. You've got to have that as a starting point. And I think that's one of the reasons why open banking has accelerated so quickly. The one thing that we've seen in the UK is that HMRC, the equivalent to IRS, I guess, in terms of doing all of those tax collections, is probably one of the biggest evangelists for open banking that you could have. Now you can pay any tax bill in the UK, literally any tax bill using open banking, as I often quote, including any fines that you might incur, which is quite interesting. But that's been phenomenal. Again, we've seen kind of fourfold increases in use of that because it solves so many problems for the users. If you're paying your annual tax bill and that might run into thousands of pounds, then you want to be super secure when you're entering that. We call them a sort code and account number here. If you don't have to do all of that, you don't want to send that to the wrong account for sure. If you don't have to do any of that, and if you're not processing that via a traditional bank transfer, then that's so much better. So that adoption and support from a large UK government agency is really, really important. But I often say the regulatory piece, it feels like we've got the balance as somebody who's been on the receiving end of that from going through that authorization process. It feels like the balance is absolutely right. We went into it, I've worked, I mentioned telecoms before, I've worked with regulators in other sectors such as Ofcom in the telecoms sector here in the UK. So we went into it fairly confident it will be a fairly quick and easy process, and then discovered it wasn't going to be either quick or necessarily easy. But at the end of that process, I'll often say now, it felt so reassuring from a consumer perspective that we've been, put through the mill, that the questions that we were asked and the responses we needed to provide needed to be super robust. So I feel like, that balance between kind of solid regulation and being progressive enough to allow the innovation is just about right.
Yeah. The other question I have is because you're looking at using basically existing fiat currencies, could be the pound or US dollar or what, but are you using any sort of like a stable coins, or are you using like Ripple, or I know a lot of, like, for example, like Avalanche? What are you kind of using as the kind of the medium of exchange?
Not currently, and we are supremely focused right now on the UK market. So everything is just GBP. It tends to be UK centric business that we're focused on. The reason for that is that, open banking is growing really rapidly, but still, if you're looking at international coverage, it's, I don't want to say sketchy, but it's certainly not complete. And I think it'll be a while before you've got that universal adoption. So one of the beauties, again, from either our charities, which is, I mentioned how we got started, or the merchants, is that this isn't a this or that solution. It is a this and that solution. So we would say to people, give your customers, give your donors the maximum opportunities to pay you. If open banking solves a massive problem for you in terms of the cost of processing, then put that at the top of the list of options, promote it, give your customers incentives to use it. But we wouldn't advocate anyone saying, okay, we're going to move exclusively to open banking now, because that would be a foolish thing to recommend. I have no doubt, the coverage, both in terms of geographies and in terms of doing things like international settlement, will improve and increase. But right now, that's our focus.
Yeah.
I guess we're not unique in that, but the UK, for once, seems to be leading the field a little bit with terms of open banking, which is really great to see. And we have a lot of kind of UK businesses to go at, our low-hanging fruit, as we might call them, before we start to think about the international aspects.
So are you seeing a world where basically everybody's able to bank, via smartphone? And how do you, like, here in the States, you have to have a credit score, they look at your income and all this. How do you get everybody banked? How do you get everybody onboarded?
And I think the technology and the affordability and the ubiquity of the technology is going to be super important if we're going to do that. So I think that there needs to be some progress and change in those areas. We definitely don't want to be introducing technology that excludes. And again, just coming out of the Innovate Finance Summit today and listening to the Bank of England talking about things like a central bank digital currency as well. a digital pound and so on. It's very, very clear. One of the statements there was we aren't giving up note issues until everyone feels like it's time for us to give up issuing notes. That will become or remain central to what we do as a central bank.
Yeah.
And I think the same applies here. We will probably have to wait some time before we've got the acceleration of technology to a point where it is ubiquitous and everybody can afford to use whatever's there. But I think removing some of those intermediaries actually in the payment flow all helps with that, because it's reducing so much cost elsewhere in that movement of money that then lends itself to doing other things and helping that penetration. We're routinely seeing 90+% savings on processing payments through open banking versus cards.
Yeah.
And we're also seeing great figures like 90% return rate once you've done your first transaction. So you will come back and do it again because it was so much easier. So all of those things, I think, point to, very rapid acceleration of this as a technology. But I'd say the same thing again, Chris. I don't think this needs to be the only solution. I think it'll be one of many, and one that suits the particular purpose. And if a different method is better for an international transaction just now, then that's fine.
Yeah.
Give people choice.
Yeah, choice. And it's kind of like I was thinking the other day, I was like, back then you had food scarcity. So, basically if you had resources, and now we have food abundance, and I'm thinking about like financial abundance, where it's not just, the rich getting richer, and, people can live lives, and, energy abundance as well. So it's going to be, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just coming in. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But one of the things that occurred to me as well with open banking, of course, it's not just payments, it's also things like account information services. So we also have a permission, for example, from the FCA to, look at account balances and then make recommendations and so on based on transactions and all of that. Let me give you a concrete example of how that might work, say, in the charity sector. With these online giving platforms like the one that we run, and when you go to a charity's website and they ask you to make a donation, there are a couple of things really they're hoping to do. One is that you make that donation a recurring donation, that you set up something that's going to be $20 a month or whatever it might be. The other thing we see quite frequently is that they will make 3 amount recommendations and then allow you to select another. So you might turn up at a charity website and it says, do you want to give $5, $10 or $25 or another amount? Now, that's pretty universal. Those amounts will change depending on the charity and the sector they're operating in, but that approach is quite universal, at least in the UK. The way that things like open banking can really help that is that when you look at that, it's a bit like a monologue. So the charity's done its research on what it thinks those 3 points should be and how to optimize them and make the middle one bigger and so on. But the reality is, in the 21st century, that should be much more a dialogue than a monologue. It should be about affordability. It should be about changing circumstances. It should be about things like cost of living crisis, and it should be based on data. Yeah. And open banking gives, with the right consents in place, us, as a fintech in that space to say, actually, we'll tell you what we think the affordability might be here, and we might do some profiling based on income, based on recent transactions. And typically a lot of, charities would have been quite skeptical about that because they say, well, do we want the donor? Is that going to incentivize the donor to give us less than we'd like them to give us? The reality is probably not, because they will feel more engaged in that conversation. They'll feel more valued as a donor. If you were to say to them, actually, we think you're probably giving a little bit too much, or the inflation rate is at this point, do you want to rethink that from that? I think that is a much more meaningful conversation and a much more engaging relationship.
Yeah.
So I think those kind of practical benefits also speak to inclusivity and just doing the right thing.
Fascinating. I love to end all my podcasts with very positive, uplifting. So what's next for Wonderful Payment? And I know you have a lot of personal ventures in the next 5 years. And how can people, check out the great work that you're doing?
We want to be rolling out our integrations with more and more e-commerce platforms and accountancy type software. So we've currently launched an integration with WooCommerce. So if you're a WooCommerce merchant, you can use open banking at your checkout straight away, certainly in the UK. So there'll be more of that to come. We want to get onto many more platforms. One of the real beauties of this is removing all of those very prohibitive card processing fees means we can serve many, many more charities. So it's a win-win-win for us. The more merchants come on board, the more charities we can serve completely free.
Yeah.
So those are our ambitions over the next couple of years. We want to be the biggest provider of open banking services in terms of volume of small businesses as possible.
Nice. I love that. And for all the audience out there, let's thank for a wonderful podcast episode. And Kieron is on the forefront of digital innovation and just, really important to get this payments and, financial sector up to date. Be sure to give all his socials a like and follow and check out his work. And thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks again to Heidi. Elevate your practice with a free AI scribe, zero cost, HIPAA compliant, and ever learning. Heidi turns tedious tasks into time saved. Ready to swap? We've got you covered for past AI scribe expenses. Head to HeidiHealth.com, get started, and make your practice the envy of every stethoscope in town.
I'm excited that you made it for another episode. You are truly the best. If you've been following the show for a while, you know that my passion is to bring you the education you need to find your path to financial freedom. Please come back week after week for new content, new resources, and great guests. Until then, if you haven't already, please be sure to check out the website, www.drchrislewmdphd.com for more support. I'll see you next week.